Well, we're nearing the end of day one of the SDG Action Zone, and it's all been incredible. But we wanted to take some time in this closing plenary to reflect on one theme that just seemed to infuse everything today, this notion of shared responsibility. What responsibility do we have to nations, to class systems, to generations and societies and people not our own? What responsibility does each of us have to all our fellow human beings? We know we move faster together. So where can we step in or step up to tackle poverty and inequalities? That's the question we'll ask in our closing today as we look to the future. To that end, we're joined by two leaders with unrelenting passion and determination. Lawyer, activist, founder of the Women in Leadership publication, and author of This Is Why I Resist, Shola Mos Shogbamimu. And the founder and national director of Democracy in Color, Australia's first racial and economic justice organization led by people of color, Tim Lacerdo. Welcome, welcome to both of you.
Hello.
Hello,
hey,
you can say hello. So we have had an incredible day and we've talked a lot about what everyone needs to do, but I'd love to hear you both reflect a little bit on a word that I think is a bit buzzy, but has real depth and meaning, particularly as we look to the future. And that's intersectionality. Both of your work really incorporates this idea, but I also think it shows us what's possible when we think of intersectionality with greater depth. So Shola, why don't you kick us off on that? Where does intersectionality sort of fall into the movement space as we look to the future for you?
Great question. I mean, let's first of all start with recognizing that the term intersectional feminism, because this is where it generated from, was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw to reflect the multiple intersectionality of the oppressions that Black women experience, how structural it is. And so when you start from that point, you start to understand that what we have tended to do in society is to treat multiple oppressions as mutually exclusive. But by doing that, we are simply enabling a deepening of the toxicity that exists. So, for instance, gender cuts across different, spheres. So whether it is possible, we know that women are seen to be subordinate to men economically, financially, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we're not fighting for our voices, right? And that we don't face other kinds of injustice and inequality. So particularly for Black women and ethnic minorities, intersectionality for me, especially in this movement, says, I need you to see me. I need you to understand every single representation that I am. If we start from understanding this, it means when you see me, you see Shola, yes, I'm Black, I'm a Christian, I'm heterosexual, I'm able-bodied. You start seeing all of these characteristics. Some of them are well-protected, some of them are not. But within these characteristics are marginalized inequalities that exist that people are experiencing. And people need to understand how they intersect. So I usually give an example about people need to understand, for instance, when you talk about transphobia, right? A Black trans woman will experience transphobia. She will experience racism. She will experience sexism. And for us, especially Black and brown people, we don't go about going, well, Monday, it was sexism. Tuesday, that was definitely misogyny. And Wednesday was racism. It doesn't work like that. We experience all these things usually at the same time. But when people and laws and policies don't understand the impact of these inequalities and how they translate, we are not protected. That is why we need to do better in protecting people of different backgrounds.
And recognizing that there are bridges there, because part of the problem with putting everybody into these discrete categories that don't recognize the intersectionality is that it allows us not to be on each other's side in places where we absolutely would be under normal circumstances. So Tim, what about you? Reflect a little bit on intersectionality and particularly your experience of it in your work.
I think that was perfectly summed up by Shola. I think, look,
you're like, drop the mic.
yeah, that's right. I think
but I don't believe you. I know you have a lot to say.
Thank you. For me, it's about taking a systems approach to issues. I think it's about realizing that people have multiple intersecting identities, and those identities amplify individual oppressions. And if you were to, as Shola was saying, take one of those oppressions individually and not, think about how our full selves intersect and how our full selves are brought to every issue and every situation that we encounter, then you're just not getting an accurate, analysis of that person's experience of the world and that person's life. And, I think an accuracy of analysis is so critical because, I think it's pretty self-evident that we can't hope to solve a problem if we don't have an accurate analysis of like what's caused this problem in the first place. And I think fundamentally that's what intersectionality is about. It's about like, what is this problem? How has it come about? And how is it truly experienced? And only then can we start to think about how can we ensure that this sort of oppression doesn't, face people and that we can build a more equitable world. And I think the other part of intersectionality is moving decision-making as close to the point of impact as possible, where we can, really center lived experience and really center, people's, the true understanding of the problem and the true understanding of the solutions that come with living the problem.
That lived true experience. Go ahead, Shola. You
everything he said times eternity. Spot on. Absolutely.
Exactly. And you can see me trying to be like, what is the appropriate quiet applause gesture to use over here? But I think clearly we're all on the same page. And there's this sense that we have to be allies of each other's causes and each other's experience in order to be all inclusive. I mean, these are basic things, and yet in a lot of ways they haven't permeated the sort of superstructure of social justice in the ways that they should. But I want to hear a little bit more about your individual work and in this conversation about what everyone can do, because of course we're talking about businesses and governments. What do people do? What do the people watching today do to support the work that you're doing? And how do they get involved, not just in these superficial ways that unfortunately are kind of common these days, but in really important, concrete, useful ways that will actually advance the agendas that you guys are working on? And Tim, why don't we start with you on this one, and then we'll just keep chatting.
Well, look, I think it's, when you're talking about what people can do, I think it's important to set the scene of like the context. And I think, it's always been important to work on social justice issues, but I think right now, we're living through multiple overlapping crises. We're facing the worst humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. We're in the worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. We're tearing our planet apart, hurtling towards climate catastrophe. And of course, we're in the midst of this once in a generation global public health crisis that threatens decades of humanitarian progress and the, shadow pandemic that comes with that, increasing, gender-based violence, the impact on education, how it threatens progress on poverty and hunger and all this sort of stuff. So the whole point of that is that this is not a time for the audacity challenged. We don't have time to play small or tinker around the edges. And we really do need moonshot ambition. Like business as usual won't cut it anymore on any of the systemic issues that we're talking about. So that's the context that we're in. And so, I truly believe that social change is an ecosystem, and we all have a variety of roles to play that are absolutely critical. And if one of us aren't playing that role, then the whole system fails, so that my main point here is that we need to take action. It doesn't matter what it is. Social change isn't a spectator sport. You can't think that someone else is going to do it. We all need to take action. And there's that common Martin Luther King quote that's, where he said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I don't think it bends by itself, though. It's going to take all of us pushing that moral arc to win a world of dignity for all. And I really think, the status quo and the people who benefit from the status quo, the people in power right now, they benefit from ordinary people, everyday people feeling disenfranchised and disempowered, feeling like they can't do anything to change things. So, if we want to change things, if we want to, beat back against a system that works for a tiny minority at the perpetual expense of the opportunity and dignity of everyone else, then we need to, take back our own power. Power is something that, it's a mindset thing as much as a policy thing. If you feel you have power, then you do have it. And that's like one of the most powerful things that decision makers do and power holders do, is that they convince us that we're powerless. And so when we feel like that, we don't do anything.
They believe it. I have to underscore something before we carry on. Oh, show us. I think you've decided on snaps. I love that. I have to underscore that when you did the list of all the things that are facing us right now, you just cruised right through it. It was crisis after crisis after crisis. And for everybody watching, I want you to rewind in the on-demand virtual library and just listen to that list, slow it down, because those are real challenges and they're not easy. And we've gotten so used to saying, oh, we're facing all of this insurmountable tragedy. There's a cognitive load that goes with that. And we have to sort of recognize that all of these things are real, but we do have an ability to affect them. And we can't just let them sort of like scroll past our ears as they're happening, even though it makes sense, because it seems like the list is just never ending. But Shola, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about this, what folks do, because I think we all know that Tim is right. Everybody's got to do something, but there's such a struggle to know what that thing is if you're not in the movements in an active way every single day. It's a bit intimidating. So what do you think about that? And how does it fit into sort of the work that you're doing? What can we support you in? How can we support you in what you're doing? And what exactly is that?
Okay, so first of all, my brother Tim, preach it. Let the world hear you loud and clear. You were so spot on, brilliant. You and I are going to get on just great. I can just
it's happening right here.
Let me first of all start by saying this, that it is not my work, it is our work. This is how I see this. And I think it's critically important for us to also understand that what to do simply means there are three things. We must mobilize, we must get political, and we must be active. People, social mobilization means different things to different people, right? But basically at its core, it means that people at an individual and collective level coming together to change things locally, regionally, and globally. It means you take your own responsibility and then it feeds into a collective responsibility and it causes a disruption. Becoming political, I can hear some people go, oh, but I'm really not interested in politics. Utter nonsense. You live politics every single day of your life.
And it lives you.
Absolutely. And politics is what determines the food on your table, the clothes on your back, and the roof over your head. So don't tell me you cannot be political, because you have to be political. You can't say that your duty stops at electing or not even bothering to elect. We are all responsible for those we place to make decisions, concerning our lives. So you must be political. You must care. You cannot afford to be politically illiterate. That is a kind of illiteracy that is unacceptable. And now, people, we must be active. Civic participation is absolutely key. You must get tired of being at the back of the march. You get that butt of yours to the front of the march and use the voice the good Lord gave you to say something, to do something, your skill set, your personality. All of that are for a reason. I don't know about you, but people go, well, what is it that makes you an activist in your work? I'm going to be perfectly honest. I get triggered. I'm not one of those people that go, well, one day I was having a nice cup of tea and I just analyzed and thought about it and reflected. What the heck? There's nothing like that. Not for me. My passion drives me. When I see inequality or injustice, that's enough for me to get my Nigerian wrapper tied around my waist, get my headscarf and go, let's go, because something's got to change here. And I think that we must all represent that one way or the other in our lives. What is it that triggers you into action? We don't all have to be loud. We don't all have to be vocal. After all, Rosa Parks, all she did was not get up and she started a whole new revolution. So all it takes is what you are, what you think, how you feel. That is enough for you to influence your own sphere and your own circles. You don't need LinkedIn to call you an influencer before you know you can influence. So within my work, as far as I'm concerned, part of what I do is to explain to people that the world we live in, I don't care if your society is based in a different continent that I'm in, right? If you understand how your society works, and I'll use, say, Western societies as an example, Western societies tend to cater to white, male, right, heterosexual, able-bodied Christian. You know that because of the way a privilege is given to those who fall within those categories, right? So women are treated as subordinate to men. Christians are treated as though, their faith is stronger and better than any other faith. Those with disability are an afterthought. They're not centered into a lot of the policies or the thinking, right? And we know how it works with our LGBTQI community, how they're still fighting for equal rights with heterosexuals. So this is the way I see it. All of these things afford a privilege to those who fall within those categories. And that privilege comes with responsibility. So even though I will never benefit from white privilege because I'm not white, right? But what I do benefit from, as an example, I'm heterosexual. And that comes with responsibility to ensure that my LGBTQIA siblings are never denied an equal value of life and liberty. I am able-bodied. That means a lot of the things and systems think about people like me that are able-bodied first. It means I have a responsibility to ensure that my brothers and sisters with disabilities are not denied an equal value of life and liberty. I'm a Christian, and I know for a fact that my Muslim brothers and sisters are always treated unfairly. It is my responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that my Muslim brothers and sisters are not denied an equal value of life and liberty. This is where your social responsibility comes in. You don't need to get it from a book, but by all means read. You don't need to get it from a documentary, but by all means watch. If you need to emulate other people, do what you need to do to learn, to grow, to educate yourself so that you can stand in the gap of those who don't have the privilege or advantage you have simply because of the society you're in. This is what I'm talking about in our work. This is what I'm talking about in advocacy. This is what I'm talking about in activism. It is important. Nobody needs to label you an activist or advocate before you know you should advocate for justice, for equality, for liberty, and for fairness. That's where I'm at. And as long as something is wrong, this God-given mouth of mine will be speaking.
We love it there. We love it where you're at. So thank you for that. And to paraphrase MLK again, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, which I think is what I'm hearing from both of you. That should be triggering enough for us to all want to get in the mix and be tired of being in the back. Now I'd love you both to reflect, as we sort of close up, on actually changing mindsets. Because in a lot of ways, we often find ourselves either talking to the people at the top who we believe aren't doing enough, or we're talking to the folks who are already in the movements. But for the folks that are watching right now and saying, I get it and I want to do more, but I don't know how to change minds yet, what do we tell them? Do we say, go play this session for your friends? What can the average person who wants to be an advocate and is intrinsically an activist actually do to shift mindsets in his or her circles right now? Tim, why don't you start us off?
Well, when I have conversations with folks who don't necessarily agree with me, I think it's really important that we start with shared values. I think, there are certainly some people, I think people in the status quo who are genuine power holders, who have built this system, who benefit off it. Those people don't have shared values. But I think the vast majority of people who are either, a weak support of my values or a weak opposed of my values, or the vast majority of people who are persuadable, somewhere in the middle, we all share the same values. We all want a world where, the intrinsic dignity and worth and value of humans is recognized, and other non-human entities as well. And I think it's really important, we might disagree about what that looks like policy-wise, but if we can start with hey, all I want here is for a world where everybody can seize their full unlimited potential, where everybody has equal access to opportunity. That's it. It's not radical. None of this stuff is extreme. It's just, I want to be able to, ensure that everybody, I want to live in a world where everybody can seize their own potential, where they don't have, their humanity, right, isn't contingent on some of the things, their color, their gender, their sexuality, their class, ability, whatever. It's just theirs because of virtue of them being human. And we support everybody to access their full unlimited potential, because that's how we thrive as a society, by ensuring that everybody can, unleash their genius on the world. So this is a very complicated topic and we could go on forever, but I think starting with shared values and then working out from there is how I try and start it.
And I want to underscore unleash your genius, because I think we do have that on an interpersonal human level. We're just not always taught to believe in it. And I think if that's one message here, and we're seeing it in action with both of you, that's a great takeaway. Shola, I'm going to give you the last word on this. How do you change mindsets if you want to go do the work we're talking about right now?
You start by changing yourself. What is it about your thinking, your mindset, your growth, your challenges, your conflicts, your bias that you need to work on? Because Tim is absolutely right about shared values. But before you get to the shared values and those narratives you're going to have to engage in, you need to be able to build the content. And that content comes from here, from what you believe. And then it also comes from here, what you understand. And what you understand comes from what you read, comes from what you learn, from the conversations you're having. But then what happens if shared values are not enough? I mean, I get into a lot of public debates where clearly there are no shared
I don't believe that.
There are no shared values here. And it sounds like, oh, people are going at each other. I say to you, don't be afraid of that. Because the point is, what you're fighting for is hard. So there's no way that coming to an outcome, a solution was ever going to be easy. But what you must remember, I mean, going on from unleashing your genius, is to have faith. You have to fight, not by sight, but by faith. You have to believe there's something you're working for, even though you can't see the change right now. Does that make sense, people? Because if you're looking just by sight, then you're going to stop. You're going to run out of energy. Somebody asked me once, well, when do you think these changes will come? I said, ask my children, because I stand on the shoulders of those who came long before me. And here I am, timid, you are, and we're talking about the same things our grandparents were talking about. Why is that? And yes, I confess, I have zero patience for people who bring their deliberate ignorance to me. In fact, I take some pleasure in shutting it down, because I'm like, what you're trying to do is zap my energy. This is not where we ought to be. Where we ought to be is where Tim was saying, which is, look, we already agree there's a situation. Let's try and talk about how to reach a solution. We may disagree on how to reach the solution, but at least we're on the same page that there's a problem. But you're still wasting my time discussing, well, I don't know if there's an actual problem, Shola, over a cup of tea and ginger nut biscuits. I'm going to tell you to pack yourself and move out of my way, because you're wasting my time. I think it's also important to recognize that people are coming from different places, and that we as human beings, we are contradictions. We are walking, living contradictions. I don't know if some of you were watching the responses from some Americans to what happened in Afghanistan. One particularly stood out to me with this white woman who was literally crying about how awful it is what is happening in America, in Afghanistan, and the people dying in the bombing. And then when she was asked in the next breath about bringing these people, saving them, bringing them to America, those tears disappeared. And she really went, well, I don't think that's the right thing to do. This is the reality of what we have faced in. And people, before you go, oh, Shola, well, maybe that's just a one-off. It's not a one-off. It's reflected in politics. It's reflected in our economy. It's reflected culturally, socially. You have to be ready that we are not all thinking the same. We are not all on the same page. Don't take it personally, because there are people who need your voice, who need your skills, who need your passion, because they are suffering in degrees of discomfort because of systemic inequalities and injustice. So people, yes, let's have shared values. Yes, let's go to the table ready to engage. But people, you better have your boxing gloves on, because I do. When the nonsense comes, be ready to punch it away and then move on.
And start with yourself. I think that is a beautiful note to end on, because so much of this is about your own intuition. It is very easy to tell other people what to do until you're put in a position where you have to accept discomfort so that others can thrive. And that is sort of the through line that I'm hearing from both of you. And it's wonderful. And in a lot of ways, it's like, that's what the SDGs are. They give us a roadmap for how we should be living our own lives every single day. And if we can stick to that, if we can even get there in the first place, I think we'll be on an incredible trajectory. Well, I will tell you, Shola and Tim, my personal benchmark for when a panel has gone well is, do I or can I not wait rather to go to brunch with these guys? And frankly, I look forward to much more of this conversation because you were both incredible. And I think you gave us a lot of awesome food for thought and a lot of feisty calls to action as well. So more to come. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And for all of you out there watching in the SDG Action Zone, don't forget to tweet us or send us through social media all your questions and thoughts. You may see them featured in the Ask Away session, and we're just going to be excited for you to join the conversation. Bye-bye.